Hey there, welcome to episode 177 of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. A little production by a street coupled with some landscaping going on, some possible noise for today's episode, but we'll make it through. The Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program, the time we are recording at is 9:48 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time on this Tuesday, July 7, 2026. We normally do publish new episodes on Tuesday mornings of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. And by the way, before I was so noisily interrupted, I am the managing director of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, Dan Hugo, as always. We got the time, we got the date, today's title and topic, Back to Architecture at Long Last. Not 100%, but we're getting there. Hopefully you're familiar with the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, but statistically you are not. We are a Nevada nonprofit corporation, a 501c3 public charity. Our purpose statement is precisely to enable and encourage ideation, innovation, and implementation to make our communities better. Note that there is no mention of code. Any innovation of any kind falls under our purview, technically. We're not going to be building rockets or anything. We'll leave that to the rich people. But a lot of ideas can, with some innovation, be turned into implementation. See what I did there? And that's that is our purpose, but what we are pursuing is basically civic innovation for the betterment of the people of Greater Vegas and beyond. And that's some of the stuff we'll touch on today. If you have not been listening to the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program for the previous 176 episodes, then episode 177 will be a bit of a kind of a refresher or a refresher. In fact, that is the word I used in the summary. I'm sorry if you have been listening. If you've not been, then it will be refreshing to hear what we are going to go over today. Hopefully, the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program is a podcast audio program produced for mainly to get the word out about what we're up to, but also as a form of documentation of sorts. We've had interviews before. It's been a long time. We could get back into that. But to kind of, if somebody comes across this episode a year from now, and then we do a similar episode a year from now, they might say, oh, okay, let's see what's changed and so on. So we just had a 4-year kind of retrospective rundown at the very briefest of summaries. On June 30th was, as it happens, the final day of our 4th fiscal year. And July 1st, June 30th, and then July 1st, I can do the math. And July 1st, 2026, the first day of our 5th fiscal year. So, more production by street noise. I'm never sure at the time if you can hear it. It always looks from the VU meter like it is a little bit loud, but there you go. So the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program, 177 episodes. Hopefully you've heard at least one. If this is it, welcome. Hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes, including a brief summary. Today is very brief, and which I'll read to you. And then the links for today's episode are the usual too. I was considering linking to some of the other things I'm mentioning here, but those are linked from our websites. Certainly the innovateforvegas.org website. Coming up with a clearer message on why there are 2 domains. So we'll touch on that in a moment. So let us begin so we can make it through this noisy morning. The summary, year 5 started, new board members seated, time to get back to work. A refresher overview for newcomers. And then, like I said, if you already know what's going on, this is just like it's a refresher overview. It is a refresher overview for newcomers and a refresher for repeat listeners, an overview for newcomers. There you go. A refresher for repeat listeners, an overview for newcomers. The 2 websites in question, Innovate for, F-O-R, Vegas, no spaces, innovateforvegas.org. I've been calling it our activity site, but really it's the cohort website. It's the civic volunteers, the initiatives we're pursuing, people working on stuff, when we get back to that mode. We escape the civic volunteer winter and we have a cohort again. The cohort has been a little bit thin lately. Your entire cohort is either recording an audio program episode or working on some other stuff. So the cohort, the people, the civic volunteers, they are not a member of the foundation. Like, they're not an employee. They're not they're not part of the governance. So they are part of a separate thing, which is fine. And then there's the foundation, Innovate for Vegas, same spelling, .foundation, which is the corporation, which is the board of directors, which is the financial information, tax filings, and so on, bylaws, all this stuff. Not all of that is published on the website yet, but now that we are back into a normal functional nonprofit corporation with board members and so on, we can update a few things and get some stuff sorted so that we are more transparent than we have been in the last year. All that said, these are not two separate legal entities. They are two sides of the same poker chip, or coin, if you like. This is Vegas after all. So it's more about transparency in relationships and efforts and initiatives and paperwork and so on. So the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, which is our legal name with the Nevada Secretary of State and with the IRS and anyone else who asks. The two websites represent the community elevation efforts and on the .org, and then the operation of a Nevada nonprofit corporation on the .foundation side. For like a finer point, the upcoming City Camp event in September 19th, 2026. If it's after that date, we can look back fondly. That will be an Innovate for Vegas .foundation affiliation, I guess, brought to you by any links having to do with our facilitation, our fiscal sponsorship, and so on. Innovate for Vegas Foundation, which is legally and functionally identical to innovateforvegas.org, but innovateforvegas.org focuses more on our cohort activities, civic volunteers that are working on our initiatives over a longer time span. So Innovate for Vegas Foundation is sort of, if you were going to make a pyramid of entities like an org chart, then Innovate for Vegas.Foundation would be on top, and then innovateforvegas.org, which is the same exact entity, but is, sort of philosophically aimed at civic volunteers, whereas City Camp and the Smarter Smart City Challenge coming up in January, these are not part of innovateforvegas.org on that org chart, because those are open to everyone. You're not a civic volunteer for our cohort and our initiatives and so on. You are working on civic innovation and community elevation, kind of like as a one-off or on your own. You're an independent. You can build whatever you want. You can use whatever tools and methods, whatever comes into your creative purview. So that still needs to be tuned up a little bit. It needs to be streamlined, what I just described. But I think that makes more sense than to call it an activity website. It might be the cohort website. In fact, I'm going to change that here and see if you even notice. Cohort Foundation. And we'll see how that goes. Okay, I had a pause there. I've noticed that if I pause during post-production, when I normalize volumes and so on, it might appear as a cut. So technically that was a cut, but it was just a pause. So there was nothing removed, just pausing so I could grab a drink of water. So all these things said, let's begin. Long unproductive we have been, or I have been, I guess. Time flies no matter what, but this far along, it could be argued that our organization has made little progress towards our Apex initiative, aiming to make our smart city smarter. Yeah, that's true. This has been the result of a number of factors we've gone through over a couple of the previous 176. I don't know why I wrote previous 176 episodes before today. Technically 177 because there was an episode 0. So we don't need to dive into that today. Dive in on that today. Dive into that. Anyway, briefly. So this will just be a quick. Briefly. It's right there in the word. The civic volunteer winter is the big thing that we need to deal with right now. which means appealing to the aspiring civic volunteer population for participation in our civic innovation efforts. In the meantime, we move along at one volunteer pace, slow though it may be. So when you only have one person wearing all the hats, things take longer. One factor that impacts that pace substantially when the one volunteer is also doing the other things. But today it's not a lament, since we have indeed seated our new board members. And we'll have more on that on an upcoming episode. They've been board members for 7 days. I think we got email set up, but we have we'll have our first, we had our annual board meeting at the end of June. So they're definitely seated in keeping with the requirements of our Nevada nonprofit status. Our one annual board meeting, I think it was on the 26th of June. It was Friday. I think it was 26th. Yeah, I believe that's correct. And then we'll begin having our regular board meetings. I think we're doing it July 20, probably a month later, 26, 25, somewhere in there. I'll look at the calendar. So, so we'll have an upcoming episode. We'll talk more about the individual board members and what they're up to. And maybe we'll even have those two people as guests. That would be nice. It's up to them. But our focus can now, me, myself, and I, our focus can return more to progress along our initiative timelines and so on. Planning for the upcoming City Camp event in September and all the other outreach effort that will require is also on the menu. So right away, back to multitasking. That was another pause. So our perspective. So this is a harder sell than I would have thought. When we first formed as Code for Vegas Foundation back in June of 2022, I've already told you it's been 4 years. June 16th of 2022, in fact, we filed our paperwork, became the Code for Vegas Foundation. I've already talked about the name change and the reasons for it and so on. But when we formed we used to be the Code for Vegas Brigade, and that was like 10 years prior. I always use the word, the time frame I always say is about 10 years, but it's now been about 15 years, I guess, give or take, from now. But at the time we formed, 10 years prior, Code for Vegas. So we decided not to reform as part of Code for America. And when I say we decided, I'm including Code for America and all that was going on there. They did eventually sunset the Brigade program, so we were not going to be rejoining the Brigade program. So look around at other brigades at that time, what they were working on, by way of GitHub organization, repositories, and some website descriptions. Code for America really didn't have a great discovery mechanism or like a directory of other brigades. So, and then when one was created after the sunset process, it was like a spreadsheet maintained by one person. This is the definition of centralized. But what we could find suggested that most brigades were working on local ideas, which were along the way eventually archived and then were either done or maybe withered or whatever the reason. So they were not really like ongoing, even though some of the brigades had been around for a while. They didn't always have projects that were ongoing. So that to me seemed a little odd. To me, in fact, coming from a software development background, as I do engineering, actual engineering, I've done actual hardware and so on. It seemed odd that archiving projects was so common. And in a post-brigade world where many cohorts have slowed or shut down, projects are archived as a matter of course. We're done. Everything's archived. It's still visible to the world. But the notion, well, okay, if you say we're done, then you're done, right? That's capital D, done. You know, we're no longer working on this. But if you're still an ongoing cohort, is anything really ever done? Especially with software, but this applies to everything. We'll get to that in a moment. Apparently, these people are done. Okay. The main question, though, was why local focused projects seem to be so short-lived. Relatively speaking, they may seem long at the time, but you know, if everything is still around, the problem that was being solved or addressed, or the new community elevating thing, I don't know if you can hear that. There's some like occasional grinding. I don't know if they're cutting down trees or something. It's crazy. I'll have to look out the window. Something I try not to do. Are these projects, are these initiatives, we call them initiatives because they're a collection of other projects. Are they really done? Like problem solved? We can throw in the towel or we can shut it down or, you know, whatever it is. So this had me concerned because again, I'm in my background. Okay, version 1 is done. You don't archive the project and call it a day, and no, you start working on 1.1 and 2 and so on. So that struck me as odd, and I think that it's probably a better idea if your organization is still around, then what you're working on should still be up for conversation. Coupled with the issues around reduced participation described along the way, and this was in my conversations with other brigade members, usually the people trying to organize the brigades, co-captains, etc. Not only our organization. So that's why I say civic volunteer winter is not a Vegas problem, although we are certainly in the midst of it. The possibility of appealing to willing participants interested in civic innovation became interesting in light of our remaining independent from Code for America before and then during the brigade sunset. So, where do we fit into the overall landscape if we're not going to be a part of the greater effort that Code for America was withdrawing from? That is, people wanting to participate in their own communities through civic innovation, civic volunteerism. During that window, we began to discuss helping other organizations go independent, which would happen anyway when the brigade program was sunset, of course, which we called Project ACT for Autonomous Cohort Transformation. So in other words, I am part of Code for America. I would like to not be. I would like to be autonomous. So our cohort would like to transform into an autonomous cohort transformation. Once the sunset timeline was set, the possibility of connecting brigades without a top-down central authority. Remember earlier I mentioned the spreadsheet is still centralized. Top-down without a top-down central authority was the idea. It came to mind. And so Project ACT transit, because nobody was really transforming anymore. It was already happening, whether they liked it or not. Project ACT transitioned into the autonomous cohort tessellation. A tessellation is a mosaic. So imagine a tile wall where each tile is a cohort around the world, perhaps. And you can see the relationship and so on. So think discovery, which then requires some development effort and stewardship. So somebody has to sort of take ownership of this notion, but not hold on to it. So it's, it's open for others to implement and make use of. The idea to move away from local only focus for the health of the civic volunteer universe was and is at hand and figures into all of this. So the idea then is, without a top-down central authority, Code for America or whomever, the tools used by former brigades and now new cohorts are not great. They weren't great before, they still are not. Searching through GitHub, for example, or GitLab is a challenge all its own, and Google may or may not be able to help depending on what their AI model is telling you, or maybe you can ask your favorite chat tool or whatever, hey, is anyone else working on this? And that may be the case. Maybe it will tell you, oh, here's the code that they have already written. Here, just have it. You have it as an example. Who cares about licensing? And you never have to talk to them. But seriously, maybe LLM interactions will be informative. I don't know. I haven't actually tried lately. You may get what you're looking for. You may get something else. It's hard to say. Who knows? These were not so much a thing when we got started on this a few years ago. In fact, ChatGPT, the first version that was released for the public, was launched on November 30th, 2022. I think we received our determination for a Code for Vegas as a 501c3 in October, second half of October sometime in 2022. So LLMs have evolved quite a bit since then. Who knows what they'll come up with and if it'll be current and so on. Even then, when you use an LLM, even then, you still get what you get. And maybe it'll be useful. Maybe it's exactly what you're looking for. Maybe it's misleading. Maybe it's a hallucination. Maybe it doesn't quote unquote know what you're talking about, and so on. So we want to be bottom up, as in controlled by the people who are it, right? It's not some centralized authority somewhere else. So you are a part of this overall civic innovation, civic volunteer universe, and so you are part of determining it, deciding it, controlling it, and so on, in a decentralized fashion, and you should be able to opt in or opt out. So there you go. Not so much signing up or getting someone's approval, just that, hey, we're in this space and here's where to find us and here's where to find what we're working on and so on. This has all been done before. It turns out this indeed has been done before. It was back in the semantic web days. Fun fact, those days never went away. When structured data with names like FOAF, F-O-A-F, friend of a friend, and DOAP, D-O-A-P, description of a project, were developed to accomplish what I'm describing here. We can add a couple of things, in our Project Act effort, we can add a couple of things to something of an augmented vocabulary. So we'll take parts of FOAF and DOAP, probably the whole things actually, and we'll construct an augmented vocabulary. So it'll basically work with FOAF and DOAP with more data, more metadata, if you like, more triples. We can add a couple of things, something of an augmented vocabulary, which is one of the initiatives we are pursuing as part of Project Act, to enable connecting of cohorts, initiatives, projects, volunteers, and so on, making use of the established and already working FOAF and DOAP vocabularies plus the augmentations. So fun fact, tile, tessellation information linking entities would be the new vocabulary, which is again a collection of other existing vocabularies with then some additional specific information that will make this all work. But this is how all this works anyway. And here's a fun fact. Your AI, the thing taking over the world, you can hand it a text file that describes, markdown or text or whatever. And you can say, oh, here's the URL for this, and they're working on that. But guess what? AI can use semantic data very easily, and perhaps even more easily than trying to parse through a markdown document. So if you hand structured data that says this is precisely the URL of this and the description of that, and it's in these languages, and this is the main contact person, if you're very explicit, which is the nature of semantic web structure, an RDF of some sort, a resource description framework, document, JSON LD, XML, N3, TTL, there's a few, but they all get you to the same place, which is, oh, okay, triples. This and that are related in this way. Next. So everything old is new again. Using these established tools and methods, the idea is to enable anyone to provide useful information to anyone else looking. Got to put that emphasis in the right place. To enable discovery of any kind in a more focused way than the Google search scheme or chatting with a large language model to see what you'll find out. And by the way, if there is structured data in place, a large language model, if it happens to locate the structured data, which hopefully it's able to use the established discovery scheme that's in use for decades, then it would have explicit correct answers to provide. It would be able to say, oh yes, this information was updated yesterday, and here are the latest interconnections that will be helpful to answer your question, right? So there's nothing magical about capturing this data. It's the fact that it's in a standard format that has been around for decades with a standard way of extending that vocabulary that could be consumed by AI agents and RAG and all this stuff. So it fits into what's going on today without relying on a centralized authority. Anyone can create literally a text file that describes what they're doing and who to contact and where to find things and so on. And then who are your collaborators? Who are we working with? Who else is working on something like this? These are the sorts of things that could be useful to a newcomer that says, hey, I wonder if anybody else is working on a city scale information sharing platform to make something better than existing news websites. Oh, look, there are two right now, and they already know each other. They're all friends of a friend, et cetera, et cetera. That's a dramatic oversimplification, but that's the basic idea. From there, so once you've discovered that other cohorts are out there, cohort could be one or more people, so cohort is good for both. The idea is to further enable connection, communication, and collaboration between cohorts of any size. Even a single person, again, and another single person could be two cohorts, and perhaps enable progress when there is a shortage of people committing to making that progress within any individual cohort. In other words, civic volunteer winter, yeah, us too. But there are two of us. What could we accomplish? And then what if a third discovers this effort and jumps in? This is how open source development of software, anyway, has worked for decades at this point. So this is not a brand new idea that will shock anyone. What should be shocking is that there is not already something like this in place so that people can find each other to collaborate. Certainly, if I found that some other civic volunteer organization in Oklahoma, or I think there is an Open Tulsa, or maybe a new cohort is forming in, maybe a new cohort is reforming in Reno here in Nevada. Maybe Hack for Reno, which just shut down recently. I say shut down because their domain name expired. Their GitHub all their GitHub repositories are marked as archived in their GitHub organization. They never did respond to any of our outreach anyway, so who knows? But if someone were to reform a cohort in Reno, Innovate for Reno, I don't know, then they could very easily discover, oh, there's an Innovate for Vegas, and oh, they're working on something that we would like to pursue. Maybe we could collaborate. And the answer is probably yes. So yeah, there's nothing new going on here. It's just enabling it to happen. And there are some other things about Project Act that could be useful in other ways. We'll talk about that in a future episode when we start testing those extended ideas. I mean, Project Act is not really deployed right now because you need to have at least two. You need to have at least two cohorts out in the world making use of these tools. So we need to get there. And that's what our 5th year is about rejoining the architecture effort. What did I say? Back to architecting? Back to architecture. So yeah, it's time to roll up the sleeves and get back to work. Enough, I'm not going to say, I was going to say enough lollygagging. I wouldn't say that. I would say that the Civic Volunteer Winter and the fact that we didn't have any board members, just myself, for a full year was a challenge, but maybe the thaw is upon us. So optimism for once. Enabling, we want to enable collaboration. That's one of the keys. Another throwback of sorts, basing a project management scheme on Agile. This will no doubt get some groans from you, listener. But remember that the original Agile idea included the notion of modifying it to work best from any particular use case, or for any particular use case. Why did I write from? That's weird. For any particular use case. So it literally says to always examine what is and is not working and improve it. I'm totally paraphrasing, but that's the take home. What's his name? Robert C. Martin, Uncle Bob, one of the people in the room when they were describing and designing the Agile notion in the Agile manifest and so on. Somebody said, oh, I don't like the stand-up meetings. And his response was, then don't do them. This is not a set of rules. It's a set of ideas. So yeah, we'll get some groans, but that's okay. It included the notion of modifying it, or leaving parts out or adding parts. So that's what modification is. So we are not going all in on stand-up meetings, for example. We don't have Scrum coaches, so all the Agile industrial complex is left at the door. No. We are not doing any of that stuff. We are taking the useful parts that apply to enabling collaboration within a civic volunteer cohort, and then between those cohorts. So what do we end up with? We call it Agile for Volunteers. And very basically, we have a structured way of describing what we want to do. It's currently aimed at GitHub and maybe GitLab issues that can be attached to initiative repositories for creating documents and so on. So it kind of has a look and feel of a project management template scheme. But remember that there will be newcomers, people that are not familiar. So it's meant as a guide more than as a draconian industrial complex structure to enforce on people, force on people. Not everything is software, by the way. So if we can describe what we want to do within the Agile for Volunteers infrastructure, it doesn't have to be software. And we hope that non-coders will be participating. So not everything is code, not everyone is a coder. So we apply the Agile for Volunteers concept to anything we are pursuing within our cohort to the extent that it works. And then if we can make it work better along the way, then that's part of the deal, right? These are based on, so what we describe is based on themes and epics and user stories and, Agile familiar terminology. And we indicate work on a particular implementation of the design, whatever it is, as tasks. So we can have a task that's trying to implement a user story, And you can see those should be visible, maybe on a Kanban board or in any other way that would be useful. Civic volunteers do not always return to the thing that they were working on, by the way. I don't know if I've mentioned this before. I have. So being able to see where we are is a challenge anyway. And certainly that's true if someone decides to just disappear. So keeping track of progress and so on is important. And then over time, hopefully we'll have a cohort of civic volunteers who understand the value of at least reaching the end of iterations. So iterations, some people call them sprints. In civic volunteer universal time, civic volunteers are not 40-hour-a-week employees or whatever. Is 40 hours even a thing anymore? It's probably like 100 with your AI agents doing your work for you. So civic volunteers do what they can when they can and so on. So if an iteration is 2 weeks, that's not going to be 80 plus hours of effort. That's going to be a couple of hours here and there, maybe. And at the end of that time, they may say, oh, I don't really have time this month, or I can't spend, I'm going to have to come back to this, or maybe I can't work on this at all. Maybe I have to go, maybe for whatever reason. So at the end of the iteration, you wrap up what you were working on, you indicate progress and so on. Somebody wants to join in later and pick up where you left off. It shouldn't be a mystery, because civic volunteer time should be working on civic innovation and elevating communities, not trying to figure out what people left. So it's a little bit front loaded on effort to try to help the person that comes after you, so to speak. So ultimately, it's one of those job life skills where you appreciate the volunteer time someone else is going to be giving, paying it forward perhaps. So yeah, civic volunteers do not always return. So being able to see where we are is a challenge anyway, but we can make an effort to capture civic volunteer time, effort, and expertise as we move along through a initiative timeline where others might pick up where someone else left off. Oh, I think I just said that before. And at any time, we can continue our whole team development efforts. One of the core agile principles we definitely built this version of it upon. So we should be able to have something of say visibility. Actually, since we know observability is the most, we should have complete observability into what we are trying to accomplish. That's a more challenging problem with software or hardware especially, or systems. But in describing what we want to do with the whole team, they should be able to observe at any time what we're trying to accomplish and how far along we are towards accomplishing. And of course, with our attribution and celebration model, anyone who has contributed to this progress should have, get their name, get mentioned at least. Attribution, recognition, celebration, the big three. The other thing that is not necessarily core to the original Agile is discoverability from outside of our cohort. Normally, if you're working on a software project at a company that's using Agile, you're not necessarily, although you may be publishing your work as open source projects of some sort, but it's not always the first priority that you advertise your progress to the world. But we do want to do that. And we would like other people to be able to, from Reno or the other examples I gave, to be able to say, oh, you're working on something similar. Can we, exchange notes? Can we share some of what we know? Can we learn from what you're doing, et cetera, et cetera? So in other words, if someone from outside of our cohort discovers our organization and its initiatives, possibly by way of Project Act, that would be nice, they may discover an initiative or some parts which fit what they themselves are pursuing, or maybe their own cohort is pursuing something related or something directly similar, so that there is a point of engagement and potential collaboration already in place. If we can implement this scheme as a standard across our cohort, and if we can get other cohorts to use the Project Act tools and methods, we have the beginnings of a decentralized discovery mechanism. That was a rough one, which just might encourage the connection, communication, and collaboration we are aiming to enable. So the wheels have to begin to turn before any of this will make sense and will show a return on investment of any of the time or understanding or any effort that goes into it. Hopefully those will be minimal. We aren't inventing some esoteric weirdness. We're actually making use of proven tools and technologies, and as it happens, the old semantic web fits very well into the world of AI. By the way, semantic web was intended to make data structured and consumable by machines. Nobody was really, I don't know if I can't say this for a fact, but semantic web was not designed for AI. It was designed for just any computer, any software that wanted to get some information from an endpoint. Like, yeah, you wrote a news article about some event, but give me the date, the time, the location, the people involved, right? So you could get actual specific, possibly database corresponding information. So you could say, oh yes, this is an article about this. This happened in this specific location with these other events with the location key, all that stuff. So nothing we're talking about as far as Project Act is outlandish. It might be the other way. Like, oh, didn't people try that and it didn't work? Because they don't know that it's actually used right now. The technologies, the tools and methods behind it. And FOAF and DOPE are still used and similar. So give it a chance. So we also want to do reusable and modular initiative efforts. So Project Act and Agile for Volunteers are meta initiatives of sorts. They're really they're like internal tools, but they're not internal. So they're designed to connect cohorts. They're not specifically, unless you look at the cohort community and then it's elevating that community. But generally speaking, these are tools to enable the really civic innovative things, right? The things you want to work on to actually impact the world around you, wherever you are. So they're sort of meta initiatives, but they're intended for use by our cohort and by other cohorts, not generally useful for everyone, although that may not be true either. Who knows? Go big or move on to the next project, I guess. There's nothing specific in the slightest about these two to the Greater Vegas locality, the Project Act and Agile for Volunteers. So anybody could use it anywhere, any way they like. So here's the thing, though. If we spend our time otherwise on initiatives which only work for Greater Vegas, opportunities for collaboration drop off quickly. Just in the perception, right? If we said My Vegas, which is one of the examples, if we said, oh, you want to work on My Vegas, then someone might say, oh, well, I'm not really in Vegas. So we renamed it. Yes, Innovate for Vegas. It is right there in our name, but it is, if we can think beyond that, we are innovating for Vegas, but you do not need to be in Vegas to innovate for Vegas. And then everything we're working on could work where you are. That's the idea. So we had the one initiative, My Vegas, which implied that it was specific to Greater Vegas. So who else would want to work on that? Everything else, excuse me, grab some water. I need more water. This is still Vegas. Today, I'm sorry, where am I? Everything else that we were doing was intended to be, and it's named and so on, non-location specific, which is actually a good way to think about developing an idea for the long term. Today, of course, the idea of an AI-generated throwaway tool is becoming a bad habit, but people are doing it anyway. But if we take anything we are working on, software or otherwise, and we consider how it could be used by other people in other places, we end up building not only for more broad application by others in other places and in ways that we didn't really envision perhaps, but we also end up certainly thinking about some things that we didn't consider when we were limiting our scope to just what we can see outside our window, for example. So if you design for everyone, you come up with better designs for your specific use cases. We would miss possibilities if we only focused on the use case of Greater Vegas and the Greater Vegas area. So if we design for anyone, anywhere, and then so what is it? We design for everyone and then we implement for Vegas. I think that's one way to look at it, but we actually implement for anyone also. Like, take your favorite application. If somebody said, oh, let's make WordPress for Vegas. What does that even mean? You make WordPress so that it works for anyone, and then you build a website that is Vegas-centric. Why don't you just use WordPress? That's a different conversation for a different day, but the idea here is to be innovative, not integrating. And there are better ways to do things than what WordPress has done anyway. So now, rather than creating and developing initiatives which only work by themselves, that's the other part of the novel approach, perhaps. Suppose we build things that work together. Project Act and Agile for Volunteers, for example, were conceived to work separately or together. Our Smart Social initiative is designed to be a people-data platform. So social, not in the social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, X sense, but we need to connect sometimes in a privacy aware manner, perhaps, data that we find in the real world and people could be other, people, building, nouns, the nouns of the real world, people, places, things, and then the data associated with them. So the way people are interconnected, perhaps asset maps or network diagrams of some sort, right? How are the people that are making things happen connected to each other so we can understand where there may be some gaps, et cetera? There's all kinds of possibilities there, especially if there's supposed to be a renaissance in Greater Vegas as an innovation hub, for example. So that same smart social initiative outcome, the platform that is developed, can then enable our open data capture platform, which is intended to capture and publish into the open data sets that exist already. That was the origin story of Code for Vegas, by the way. Our open data capture platform would expand the scope and grandeur of the open data scheme to draw in more data, especially if it's community provided. That way it's not one person going and pulling out business licensing data to publish in the City of Las Vegas business license GeoCommons data set, but it could be user driven. It could be, there's a few different ways to do this. So open data capture platform could make use of the smart social backend database and connecting of people and data. Or MyMuni project, formerly MyVegas, MyMuni initiative, I should say, and the other side of that coin, the Welcome initiative, MyMuni being for people who live in a place, and Welcome being people who visit a place. There's a lot to be tried out and tested and verified, and maybe some co-creation could happen with Vegas, because we do have a Vegas local population and we have a lot of visitors. Something like 13-ish times as many visitors as we have people living in the Greater Vegas area. If we embrace the notion of civic innovation and civic volunteerism, we value the contributions and continue to apply them toward community elevation on a longer timeline rather than discarding that work early. So others in the space around the country and beyond could argue, oh, that's not what's happening. I don't know, but appearances suggest. So why would we end of life? Oh, we're done working on the MyMuni project. If it works, if it does good things, we should never be done. We should always be willing and able, to the extent that volunteers are around to do so, to continue improving and making better versions and learning along the way. And then, of course, our labs spin-off model, and that's another conversation for later. I've talked about it countless times. We should not, if people have spent their volunteer time, effort, and expertise on something, we should let people continue to use it. And we should be interested in continuing to pursue improvement and other developments. And I'm speaking kind of in an abstract, but definitely leaning towards software, but it could be anything. It depends on what we're doing. If somebody says, I have an innovative idea that I would like to pursue and it's not software, I would say, come on in, let's see what's up. How can we enable it? How can we, whatever it is, we can continue to build up, so to speak. And any newcomers to our cohort, for example, or collaborators outside of our cohort, for another example, will have active initiatives to look at, even if they are done, quote unquote done, because when is anything really done anyway? So there's really, as long as our cohort is around, there's really no reason to call. Now, there will be exceptions, but ideally, if something is working, if something is functional, it solves a problem. The only reason to archive or end a project is because there's like a variation that does it better. You're going to migrate to the new thing. We originally did it this way, but if we make use of this other design, it works better. So we'll stop developing the old way, but its functionality will be re-implemented in a better way, et cetera, right? So you're still solving the same problem, but how you do it is changed, improved, and so on. So, I can't say globally no more end-of-lifing projects, but I can say it shouldn't be so easy to just say, oh, we're done. But what about all that time I spent on it? Yeah, well, too bad. Here we go. Part of our challenge in the Greater Vegas area is to make connections with people who may be aspiring civic innovators, who simply do not yet know where to spend that energy, where to get started, etc. Must they join our cohort? No. Could they form their own cohort here in Vegas? Yes, of course they can. We don't have the lock. Of course, collaboration would be nice if they do that. Maybe they'll do something in Reno or Sparks or where else? Laughlin, anywhere. Could be anywhere. Carson City. This is where the Smarter Smart City Challenge comes in, though, to extend the notion of fixing or enhancing our communities from within to everyone. You don't have to join anything other than, yeah, I want to participate in the Smarter Smart City Challenge. And then later at the end, you'd say, oh, we did the thing. Here it is. Now we're going to present it, right? So you've only joined the timeline. You're not responsible for anything other than to yourself and maybe your team if you have one. This may be one path forward toward cultivating a culture of innovation for Greater Vegas. Some people argue that culture of innovation is a company or some other like small group, a small community of people. But I always say, if you went to Silicon Valley in 1996 and you ask anyone on the street, they would pretty much tell you there's some innovation going on. Here, people would probably suggest that there's professional sports going on, and they'd be looking forward to Formula One returning in November, obviously. City Camp in September 2026 will be something of an interstitial step towards the Smarter Smart City Challenge, though a valid undertaking on its own anyway. So not to take anything away from City Camp as a standalone event, that's happening around the world to the extent that it is global, but certainly at scale, multiple places on September 19, 2026. So that's when we will have our inaugural City Camp. You can find more information about that. Well, I don't know if you can find it today, but you'll find more information about that on our innovateforvegas.foundation website to be sure. Where to go. There is a Smart City Vegas website that we will ramp up for all these things. Programs like these, City Camp and Smarter Smart City Challenge, outside of our normal cohort initiatives roadmap, though they are, also align with it, and they might help to bridge that gap between what I describe theatrically as, somebody should fix that, to bridge that, and, I could fix that. I say theatrically because usually I gesture a little bit, point at things. So yeah, culture of innovation also includes the connection between that's something that's going on in another place with another group of people. You bridge that with, but I could also do those things. I could join that group of people, or I could make my own group of people, right? There is no monopoly. You don't have to be a certain age or height to be an innovative person, etc. And so on, and so on, and so on. After so many fits and starts over the last 4 years with not so many, but there's just been a factor along the lines of continuing participation versus people kind of just disappearing. So getting to the commitment stage means getting to a point where people feel that they want to contribute. This is why I say there's really, and I did this in a previous episode, we're not really looking to recruit people. Outreach is a little bit easier when you look at things that way, although you do have fewer people appearing, I think. But we aren't out recruiting. We aren't going to, people have said, you should go visit the colleges and you should, but really what we could do is make this appealing by doing interesting things and then having people lean in and say, hey, what is this? Can I be a part of this? If you ask people to show up and they ask where the free food is and so on, you don't get people returning next time. And that's just the way it is. And so we need to do things in a better, more effective way when it comes to appealing to people who might be interested in taking part in this stuff. And they're out there. There are people that do find this stuff interesting. The question is, will they respond to recruiting, or will they take note that this thing that I've come to realize is quite useful and fixes an issue that I had, or provides something bright in my day, whatever it is, whatever the thing is, they might say, this is a civic volunteer. I might be interested in participating in this. Let me see where and when and all the details. So the appeal has to, I think, be more functional than a messaging. So that's an idea to pursue this at this time. But the time really is at hand to make this stuff go, even at one volunteer pace. Because just think, and this is Vegas math, if we add one more person, that's a 100% increase in participation. Though fingers remain crossed that it will not be one volunteer pace for long. So we'll see what happens. That is the end of this podcast episode, audio program episode. I'm really interested in getting away from the word podcast, but no one else is. So I use them interchangeably. Audio program, finishing it up for this Tuesday, July 7, 2026. Remember, we do publish new episodes on Tuesdays. Remember, we are a 501c3 public charity. Remember that everything we do is about community elevation. There's some other things like job skills and life skills and the ability to collaborate with others, whether they're here locally or remote at a distance, cultivating a culture of innovation. There's a few other things, but we do want to see more innovation, and we do want to pursue our purpose statement to enable and encourage ideation, innovation, and implementation to make our communities better. And I would like now to go get another drink of water because my mouth and my voice is fading and my mouth is dry, and that's a good way to end it right there. Stay tuned for more through the year. InnovateForVegas.org, InnovateForVegas.Foundation. Think about participating in City Camp. We'll talk about that more in future episodes. Sign-ups for City Camp are coming in August. City Camp itself, September 19, 2026. Take care now. Thank you for your support. I'll see you. We'll see you around. Bye-bye.